Few #1 pop songs contain 3 key changes, hidden meters, and drastic tempo changes, not to mention a Celtic fiddle introduction and an acapella folk song to close it out. But that is exactly what Dexys Midnight Runners did with Come On Eileen, a song of infectious hooks and dynamic motion. Dexys Midnight Runners created a sound unlike any of their peers, a fusion of soul and Celtic folk with a punk attitude. Come On Eileen catapulted the British band into international success, even knocking Michael Jackson from his steady perch at the top of the charts in 1983. Hello there, it's Warren Hewitt here. I hope you're doing marvellously well. Welcome back to another episode of the series. If you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you hit that notification bell, you'll be notified when we have a new video. And of course, if you're into production, you can go to producelikeapro.com and sign up for the email list, and you'll get a whole bunch of free goodies. Dexys Midnight Runners was founded in 1978 in Birmingham, England, by Kevin Rowland and Kevin Al Archer, after the breakup of their punk band, The Killjoys. Moving away from punk, Rowland began immersing himself in vintage soul music. Dexys Midnight Runners was heavily influenced by the movement in Northern England called Northern Soul. This movement emerged out of mod culture, as referenced in the band's own name. Dexys refers to Dexedrine, a drug favoured by Northern Soul fans for its ability to keep them energised and dancing all night. Thus, Dexys Midnight Runners. Like its mod roots, Northern Soul expressed a fascination with Motown and American black popular music, but zeroed in on a particular repertoire of black American soul music, largely from the mid-60s.
With punk and everything, it swept a lot of things away, but I knew that people would want to dance again. With Dexys, we went back to the 60s in a way and just started to rediscover these records, Sam and Dave, you know. Hold On, I'm Coming, we did that in our early set. Aretha Franklin's Respect, we were listening to that. And these just sounded actually, you know, it's just that thing about what else is going on at the time. They sounded really fresh.
The band's first hit was actually a homage to Geno Washington, an American soul musician who was stationed in England with the US Air Force in the early 60s. Gaining a reputation playing in clubs around London, Washington and his Ram Jam band had 2 of the UK's best-selling albums of the 60s. Hand-clapping, feet-stomping, Funky Butt live in 1966 and Hipster Flipster's Finger-Popping Daddies in 1967. By the time Dexys Midnight Runners released their song Geno in 1980, Washington had taken some time off from the music industry. But when Geno hit #1 in the UK, he was quickly encouraged to begin performing again. Geno was the band's first #1 single in the UK, released 4 months before the band's debut album, Searching for the Young Soul Rebels. The album was also successful in the UK, peaking at #4. However, it wasn't until 1982 and Come On Eileen that the band was able to break into the American market. The lineup for Dexys Midnight Runners experienced a large amount of turnover, even from the very beginning. Kevin Rowland has remained the only consistent member of the group's lineup, as well as the band's primary songwriter. Rowland grew up in Wednesfield, Wolverhampton, England, to Irish Catholic parents, spending ages 1 to 4 in Ireland before returning to England again for the rest of his upbringing. His earliest musical memory is the Irish folk song The Moonshiner.
I can remember singing it and singing songs and hearing songs when I was about 2, 3. And my favourite song, which I learned when I was about 3, was, well, I don't know what it's called. I think The Happy Wanderer it's called. No, it's not. Anyway, it goes, I'm a rambler, I'm a gambler, I'm a long way from home. And if you don't like me, then leave me alone. I eat when I'm hungry, I drink when I'm dry. And if the moonshine don't kill me, I live till I die.
Rowland's Irish Catholic upbringing has influenced much of his songwriting and artistic expression. The band's first single, Dance Stance, criticises anti-Irish bias by referencing great literary figures from the country's history. Figures like Oscar Wilde, Samuel Beckett, Edna O'Brien, Lawrence Stern, Sean O'Casey, and Brendan Behan. Their debut album showcased a photo of a young Catholic boy in Belfast. The boy is pictured carrying all of his possessions during the social and political unrest in Northern Ireland of the time. Roland explained, "I wanted a picture of unrest. I could have been from anywhere, but I was secretly glad it was from Ireland." While the Irish influence was always there, Come On Eileen and the rest of the band's second album takes it to a whole new level, blending Celtic strings and themes with soul smoothness and brass. The first single to be released from the band's second album was called The Celtic Soul Brothers, referring to Roland's Irish background and the Scottish heritage of the band's trombone player, Big Jim Patterson. The band even changed its look to match the new sound. The earrings, Coleman's jerkins, feathered berets and scarves were exchanged for denim overalls and peasant skirts and shawls. The album's title, Too-Rye-Ay, draws its name from a common Irish lyric. Roland says he remembers hearing the line growing up. Too-Rye-Ay that I sing throughout is just an Irish thing thrown in. I heard it growing up when my parents had friends over to sing on Saturday nights after returning from the pub. Most listeners were probably familiar with the phrase through a 1930 Tin Pan Alley song by Irish-American composer James Royce Shannon. Too-Ra, Loo-Ra, Loo-Row, that's an Irish lullaby, as it was called, was recorded by a wide range of performers including Bing Crosby in 1944 and in the late 70s, Van Morrison with the band. Besides the album's title, the phrase also repeatedly appears in the lyrics for Come On Eileen. More generally, the album changes their sound by bringing in a Celtic-sounding string ensemble alongside the brass. I was always trying to get a bit of Irish into our music. My parents were Irish and the Troubles were still going on in Northern Ireland when we were writing the song. In 1981, you couldn't really talk to people about what was happening in Belfast. A lot of English people didn't want to know, so I snuck in some Irish flavour. Come On Eileen was released with several slightly different edits, but the original single famously opens with Helen O'Hara's violin line playing a traditional Irish melody, commonly known through Thomas Moore's song Believe Me If All Those Endearing Young Charms. Further clarifying the reference, Roland sings Moore's lyrics and the melody as a postlude to Come On Eileen. The main lyrics to Come On Eileen were also intended to make a point about young desire in conflict with Roland's Irish Catholic upbringing. Like any song that uses a direct name, fans have tried to figure out whether there really was an Eileen. Roland's interviews over the years have given conflicting responses. More recently, he explained that the song imagines the figure of Eileen as a composite of many of his past experiences. For years, I told everyone that Eileen was my childhood girlfriend. In fact, she was a composite, to make a point about Catholic repression. On the projected Passion Review Tour in 1981, there was this girl interviewing us, and she was going on about the spiritual nature of this music. And I'm thinking to myself, right, but that's not what I'm feeling at this moment. She was really good looking, and I was reminded of being a teenager surrounded by Irish Catholic girls you couldn't touch. But at the same time, there were these overpowering feelings of lust, which you're not supposed to have. Come On Eileen developed out of a different song the band had been performing in their live shows called Yes, Let's, which Roland credits as a rough draft of Come On Eileen. As they were preparing their second album, they wanted a pop hit and thought Yes, Let's might serve as a foundation for the track. Roland later reflected, I always want what I haven't got, or I used to. I was hankering after some pop success at that point. I'm not saying we wrote it with that in mind. Oh, that I would be that clever. But we did write it, like everything we did, the best we possibly could. We worked our asses off, every detail counted. If Yes, Let's was going to be their hit, Roland and the band realised it was going to need a stronger chorus and melody. So they began playing around with different changes to the song. First, they focused on the rhythm, taking their inspiration from Unit 4+2's Concrete and Clay and Tom Jones's It's Not Unusual. Both songs have an underlying pulse of bum-de-bum, bum-de-bump, which they incorporated into Come On Eileen. They liked how it gave the song a drive and yet was danceable. They also pulled some of the lyrics from Yes Let's. You can hear how the opening line contains an early version of the first verse lyrics of Come On Eileen. Here Roland sings Poor Johnny Ray sounded so sad upon the radio. In Come On Eileen, they mainly kept the words to this line, but changed the melody. For the chorus, they first began by changing the lyrics to James, Stan and me. Have this arrangement, you see. And then they're going to help me up from now. According to Roland, James refers to the inspiration of James Brown, and Stan refers to Van Morrison. A personal joke and the nickname dating back to the mid-70s when he tricked a group of unsuspecting teenagers into thinking Van Morrison was a comedian named Stan Morrison. It's a silly reference that no one outside of the band would ever have caught, but ultimately those lyrics didn't last long. After hearing his sister singing along to Squeeze's Labeled With Love while she was washing dishes in the kitchen, he misheard the lyrics I, me and myself as Eileen and myself. Inspired by that, Roland began singing Come On Eileen instead of James, Stan and me as a temporary filler lyric for the chorus. But they soon realised it was a strong hook and reworked all the lyrics and the song's title to centre around it. While the song cleverly weaves diverse influences, it's also quite remarkable for the way it brings together different tempi, keys and individual sounding sections. The song, of course, begins with the strings playing the tune to Believe Me If All of Those Endearing Young Charms in a completely Celtic folk style. Then suddenly it breaks into a strong pulse and infectious groove in F major. The groove then pivots to C major, which carries through the first verse. But then at the chorus, it suddenly shifts to D major. The second verse returns to C major and then back again to D for the chorus. After the second chorus, however, it stays in D but completely changes tempo, slowly accelerating over a march-like feel. And that isn't the only interesting rhythmic feature. At the end of every verse, the band sneaks in a bar of 2/4 to articulate the key change. The end of chorus 1 leading back into verse 2 has 2 bars of a stripped down pulse before getting back into the song's regular groove. The song finally ends up with Roland's acapella voice, singing Moore's Believe Me If All of Those Endearing Young Charms. Oh, believe me if all those endearing young charms. Come On Eileen and the Too-Rye-Ay album was recorded at Genetic Studios in Streatley. The studio is quite new, started in 1980 by Martin Rushent and Alan Winstanley, the latter of whom co-produced Dexys Midnight Runners' Too-Rye-Ay album. The pair built Genetic Studios out of a barn in the back of Rushent's home. The studio's first big success was the Human League's Dare album in 1981. After that, they upgraded the studio with an SSL desk, which Dexys Midnight Runners would have used when they came in to record in early 1982. The album was produced by Clive Langer and Alan Winstanley, who were quickly gaining a reputation as a production duo. Langer reflected, "People became aware of us as a team because of the first Madness album, and we consolidated it quite quickly with lots of other things. But it wasn't until we did Dexys' album Too-Rye-Ay that we really started calling ourselves a partnership and telling record labels that we came as a package." The sound that came together for Too-Rye-Ay and Come On Eileen was completely different from anything else at the time. In part, it was due to the band's completely unique instrumentation. While founding member Kevin Archer had quit the band after the first album, Roland credits him with inspiring the new sound. Archer's new band, the Blue Ox Babes, recorded their first tracks with classical violinist Helen Bevington, When Roland heard them, he wanted to incorporate some of what they were doing into Dexys' new album. He recruited Bevington, giving her the stage name of Helen O'Hara. They also brought in Steve Brennan on violin, and Kevin "Billy" Adams plays banjo in addition to guitar. Seb Shelton, who had previously played with the Young Bucks and the mod revival group Secret Affair, plays drums on the track. Giorgio Kilkenny and Steve Wynn played bass, with Kilkenny also recording background vocals. On organ, piano, accordion and backing vocals is Mickey Bellingham, who would later go on to found the band General Public with another former Dexys member, Andy Stoker Grocott, and Mick Jones of The Clash. The brass section was led by Big Jim Patterson on trombone, Paul Spear on flute, saxophone and tin whistle, and Brian Maurice on saxophone. The brass section actually quit Dexys Midnight Runners in the earliest days of Too-Rye-Ay album when Roland first brought in string players, but then they were convinced to remain in the group long enough to record the album. Come On Eileen was released as a single on June the 25th, 1982, about a month before the Too-Rye-Ay album. The song topped the charts internationally, including the US, UK, Australia, Belgium, Ireland, New Zealand, South Africa and Switzerland. It hit number 2 in Canada and was in the top 10 throughout Europe. It won the Best British Single Award in the 1983 Brit Awards. Dexys Midnight Runners had been popular and already achieved their first number 1 in the UK with Gino, but it was this track that broke them into the US market, even knocking Michael Jackson's Billie Jean from the number 1 spot. The song's singular sound was all their own, and it took the US by storm. The song's music video received constant airplay on MTV at its release, further showcasing the band to the US market. Come On Eileen was a massive hit in 1982, but the band did not survive the decade. They broke up in 1987 and did not record again until 2003. The track is often viewed as a one-hit wonder because it was the band's only US success. But what a success it was. VH1 named it at number 1 on their list of 100 greatest one-hit wonders of the 80s, and number 18 on their list of 100 greatest songs of the 80s. In a poll for ITV, the British public voted Come On Eileen number 6 for their favourite 1980s number 1 song. In eschewing the synthesizer in favour of strings and brass, Dexys Midnight Runners separated their sound from the rest of their peers and created a hook-filled pop classic which sounds as fresh today as it did in 1982.